Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. And today on the show, we have some interesting guests. We have the folks behind the IP34 initiative in Oregon, where they plan to have a ballot initiative to see if Oregonians want to vote on having legal psilocybin for medical purposes only. And this is a really interesting bill. This is novel. I don't know of anywhere else in the country doing it this way, but the people behind it really, in my opinion, carefully curated the language in the bill, and they got a lot of great people behind it, including Paul Stamets and Dr. Broners and many others. So it's a really interesting group, and we're here to really just dig into that. As they say, this is not where you just go to the psilocybin store and buy some mushrooms. This is a little bit different than that, where there will be like certified centers to offer these services after they meet certain criteria. And there will be an independent board elected or appointed to have, well, if this passes, where experts will contribute to the government really laying everything out in the way that it should, most ideally be formed according to the board. So it's a really cool organization. I'm excited about it and really want to see where it goes. There's certainly some controversy around this, but I never really was too sympathetic with that controversy, and I'll let you make up your own mind. So many of us listening to this are not in Oregon, but the organization needs people in Oregon to sign the petition to get it on the ballot. So if this is something you're interested in, check it out. I think it's yes on ip34.org. The Oregon Psilocybin Initiative is the other name for the organization. So yeah, check it out. If you want to support the show, we've got a number of ways to do that. So if you want to leave us a small donation, as small as $2 a month, you can do that over at patreon.com/psychedelics today. There's some perks there that you might check out before you sign up. We've also got a number of classes at psychedelicEducationCenter.com, a few free classes, a few donation-based courses. So 8 common mistakes, spiritual emergence, psychosis, or what's it called? Spiritual emergence or psychosis. So a really close look at, what are these topics and how do we tell? We've got a great course on the shadow side of psychedelia that Kyle put together with Dr. Ido Cohen. And it's a fantastic program there. And we've also got Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. That comes up. The course starts in July 9, and it's an 8-week program. Very comprehensive. People seem to love it. We've had a great time teaching it as well, and we continually try to improve the program. So check it out, psychedelicEducationCenter.com for more. I hope you do. And yeah, now a word from our sponsors, and we'll see you on the other side. This episode is brought to you by Mudwater. Mudwater is a coffee alternative with 4 medicinal mushrooms and adaptogens. With 1/7 the caffeine is a cup of coffee, you get sustainable energy without the anxiety and jitters of coffee. Kyle and I have had about 3 months worth of Mudwater, and we really like it a lot. Mudwater has really helped me slow down my coffee consumption, and I feel great after drinking it. Another thing I like about this company is that they donate a portion of each month's revenue to MAPS. Check them out at mudwater.com, mudwtr.com. Use the code psychedelic at checkout for 15% off. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we have Tom and Sheri Eckert from the IP34 ballot initiative up in Oregon. What do y'all call it?
Psilocybin Therapy Initiative.
PSI for Oregon. Yeah. It's I'm better with acronyms, but moving on. So thanks for joining us today. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Excited to dig in on this. This is a really exciting initiative, novel in the U.S. There's, as far as I understand, no other states doing a similar ballot initiative currently. So it's extraordinary to see that this is happening in Oregon. Really exciting time. And I like your timeline too. It's, you get on the ballot, great. You get voted through, great. But then there's still a period of time where a group of people can work for years to develop an ideal system, or hopefully an ideal system.
That's right.
Yeah. So how did y'all get interested in this movement, like being interested in putting so much energy into this?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to come at that. Psychedelics is such a rich subject, and certainly one that I've been eyeing for quite a long time. Sheri came to it a little bit later, though she always had an interest in consciousness and transformation, and I think that's where we came together on it. About 5 years ago, we started dialing into the research out there. Knew it was going on previously, but we read an article in the New Yorker by Michael Pollan. You might remember the trip treatment, kind of a precursor to his great book, that really laid out all the amazing research out there. And at the time, there wasn't like a spotlight on that. So that was one of the first really widespread pieces that laid out just how powerful these compounds are in a clinical setting. And so that really piqued our interest, and we stepped back from that, discussed it, thought about how we could enter the space for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, we did a lot more digging once we saw that there was really a lot of amazing clinical studies going on. And so we really started reading everything we could get our hands on. The trip treatment was just the trigger for us to really dive into it. And as therapists, one thing that definitely matters to us is helping our clients to achieve what they're looking for in terms of mental wellness as quickly as possible. And that's not always easy to do in today's society and within today's modality of therapy. So we really felt very inspired to see if there was a way, and this was way back in 2015, if there was a way that Tom and I could actually create a modality that we could introduce to Oregonians that was safe, that evaluated risk, that implemented structure and regulation in a positive community-based way. And that was the beginning.
Right. And also didn't cover up symptoms. We weren't too thrilled, like a lot of us, with the current pharma models. We have mental health issues across the country, especially in Oregon. We have some of the top rates of mental illness in the country. So we have something of a crisis here. And I know that's true in other places as well. So that is kind of the proof in the pudding that the status quo isn't working to the degree that it should. So we're looking to create another option that can address mental health issues, while at the same time moving away from a pharma-driven model and opening this up a little bit to anyone who might safely benefit. So we really pay attention to the safety and the risk analysis, and at the same time kind of turn inside out the model of kind of creating therapy only for qualifying conditions. In other words, specific diagnoses, which is what you see at the FDA level, which we can get into. We fully support the science and everything that led to this point, of course, but that's kind of where we shift into a model that will bring more access to Oregonians specifically, and we hope that spreads.
Yeah, we do. And, we're really goal-oriented to help individuals get off of daily dosing meds. And so that's very important to us. And the beautiful thing about what we're seeing unfold in the clinical studies is that you can have a psilocybin experience once or twice, and there's a radical change. And it's not the psilocybin itself, it's the experience, which is really amazing. It's speaking to the fact that we all have our own inner therapist. And psilocybin has the ability to help us connect to that inner therapist. And so, yeah, we see it as not a panacea, but definitely as something that should be in the toolbox for other for service providers.
Yeah, that's really interesting and great to hear. So I'm hearing your language, inner therapist. Stan Groff started calling that the inner healer, like I think in the 60s or 70s. And it's a really interesting concept. And it's interesting. I have to ask or talk to my breathwork clients about this and say, like, well, it's the same way your body knows how to heal a wound. Your body knows how to heal psychical issues or mental issues. And you just have to set the stage appropriately. And psychedelics can play a part at times.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating philosophically, psychologically. The revolutionary aspect of this is that the change agent is the experience itself. the work is being done within an experiential mode, as opposed to passively taking a pill and tweaking brain chemicals. Psychotherapy is meant to be experiential as well. It's often more didactic, more kind of back and forth, and less kind of being in the moment and having kind of a release, although that's when the action really happens in therapy. So there's an art to get there in psychotherapy, but it's challenging to get there in psychotherapy. Certainly great when it does, and we have a lot of respect for the art of psychotherapy. But this idea that we can create a space that loosens up and creates flexibility in the brain such that that needed healing kind of rises through is just endlessly fascinating and very hopeful for the field, which has been static for some time.
Right. Like if we look at just pharma development, like pharma's been unable to put out very many new drugs that have been super helpful. And
yeah, for the last 30 years, we really have not seen very much change in the world of psychiatry in regards to pharma. And that is, I think, why we see such an increased number of individuals struggling with mental health illness and addictions, because we haven't been able to jump or leap to that next level realization that transformation comes from within. And we look to other people to heal us when we are our own gurus. We heal ourselves every day with our mind. And so the beautiful thing about psychedelics, and specifically psilocybin assisted therapy, is it lets you tap into the places that you need to tap into. It gets all corners of the brain speaking to one another. And that creates a mentality that is full of life and full of illumination, which I think helps individuals really move into that rapid healing state.
Speaks to its trans-diagnostic efficacy as well, which is another, I suppose, revolutionary aspect to this modality. Is it's not targeting symptoms, it's kind of providing this personal x-ray as to where the healing needs to happen. And sometimes that's even surprising to those in the experience, what that is, because it's often deeply buried. And so, in the history of psychedelic therapy, there's kind of been this idea that psychedelics can work to open the doors of the unconscious and get in there, bring those dynamics to light, and potentially open up kind of cathartic moments of healing. And yet that's not all, right? There's this trap door into the transcendent, this other experience that even goes beyond personal history and into something much larger. And that alone seems to have, well, frankly, the most healing potential, as the research shows that these mystical type experiences are correlated with the healing. The more intense the mystical experience, the more clinical outcomes are achieved. So again, this is tremendously interesting.
Yeah. So you walk away with more than you anticipate. You become more ego-minded. You become more sensitive to the sacred. You feel a reconnection to self, to others, to the earth, and to the cosmos. And it's when done properly within the right set and setting, it has been shown to be people's one of their top 5 experiences in their lifetime, which is amazing. You can't say that about Prozac, And so it's really amazing to see nature provide us with this small little fungi, this openness and this ability to sit with self in a way where it doesn't hurt to sit with self.
Yeah, that's amazing. So access in Oregon is a big deal, right? So you decided to go the political route and create this ballot initiative. And it seems like it was a really long process for you to get to where you are now. When did you really get the ball rolling on your project?
Well, we started in 2015, as Tom shared earlier. That's when we said, okay, we've got to do something with this. And then we started really analyzing what would work best, what would actually kind of run in parallel with the FDA work. And that is why we chose to wait off until 2020. We wanted the clinical studies and the FDA breakthrough status to really continue to highlight the benefit and the low risk associated with psilocybin therapy. So in January of 2017 is when we filed our first draft.
Yeah, so that is that right?
That is right, January 9th.
So yeah,
I have a picture. I remember.
There was a process of developing a very detailed idea. I remember that. And we had started modest beginnings, just put up a website and said, here's what we're trying to do.
The Oregon Psilocybin Society.
Yeah, so the Oregon Psilocybin Society is kind of this underlying organization that's developed to be a thing. But at the time, we were just trying to pull together support for the idea. And meanwhile, we were working on a detailed draft, and nobody was doing this at the time. There was no space of psilocybin policy reform or psychedelic policy reform, except for the FDA's push for changing the scheduling. But at a state or city level, there was no such space. So we were really frontiering it, creating it. It felt like we were kind of looking into the future and writing a little bit of science fiction, like what is this going to look like? And as you get into that, the challenged project at hand is to create a really self-consistent framework that expresses the spirit of what you're trying to do, which is get healing to the most people possible in the safest way possible. And yeah, so each stage took a little while. We really took our time developing the idea, consulting people, getting connected to people. And the psychedelic community was great. We were able to access lots of experts that we had only read about before. And now a lot of them are our friends and on our advisory board and things like that. And then, as Sheri mentioned, we went through some rotations with the language of the initiative, brought more people on board that could really flesh out every last nook and cranny of what that was about. And so, long story short, we moved into, we were always campaigning. I would say the campaign started when we started talking about it.
Yep.
But there's been leveling up of intensity and kind of new initiations of the campaign.
And the more we spoke with individuals and the more we spoke at events and conferences, the more we were really thankful that we weren't in a rush, that we were able to listen to the perspective of physicians and those that are working in the clinical medical side of this, and then as well as just the individuals who are doing the underground work, and trying to develop a framework that provides the safety, as we talked about, and the ethics and the best practice standards, but having it something that isn't just strictly in the medical model and very community-based. That was our goal, and that wasn't an easy thing to achieve.
Yeah, it takes a little clarification, actually. So what we mean by that is really, we like to use therapeutic model. It's a careful model with discipline, with, as you said, standards, best practice standards, ethical standards, pulling all of that good stuff, the rigor that is required to really optimize the effectiveness and mitigate the risks of psilocybin therapy, and putting that into its own space, right? So the interesting part about our initiative is it creates standalone licensures to become psychedelic facilitators, to become what we call service centers, which can look like a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be a sterile clinical setting. It can be a retreat center. It can be out in the woods. It can be. It has to be a facility. It has to have parameters, and it has to abide by safety standards and things of that nature. So the regulations that we'd like to put in place are all about creating just a backstop of quality standards to keep this really effective and really safe. But otherwise, it's about activating people to create this new, kind of participate in this paradigm shift. It's not a top-down handing down what this is going to be. It's, as you said, a community-based way to approach this.
Kind of like the lotus flower, just, opening up and blossoming into something that we're not 100% sure what everything will look like, but we know that there is this container that is healthy and that individuals can practice in the service center role, creating space that meets the needs of individuals. A lot of people don't like the idea of doing this work on their own, and they want assistance. And some people prefer a more clinical environment. Some people prefer a more kind of a sacred environment. And so it's important that people have the opportunity to search and look and find that one place where they would feel comfortable, and that one person with whom they can connect and have this experience.
Yeah, so training is obviously a really big deal, and you've probably thought about it at length. And I guess maybe before we get into training, like this idea of this 2-year window with the board of is it a board of directors, or what's the phrasing on this group?
An advisory board.
So it's a governmental advisory board for this if and when it passes.
And once it passes, the Oregon Health Authority is mandated to develop this training or this advisory board that will obviously advise them on what is the best protocols for unfolding this into reality and implementing it into society.
Mm.
Yeah, but I think that needs nuance. The advisory board is appointed by the Oregon Health Authority, but they're not government officials or employees. They're not governmental.
The advisory board is not.
Yeah. So in other words, the advisory board will be made of experts that we may know some of those names. I'm sure Paul Stamets is going to be on the board for the production side. People like we've already developed a prototype board, and we haven't really announced this too much yet, but it's exciting to us of folks that we think can help Oregon define the training. And people like Francois Borzat, who wrote Consciousness Medicine, people like Mark Hayden, who's the director of MAPS Canada. Robin Carhart-Harris is on the board over in Imperial College. Pam Kriskow is medical doctor in Vancouver in Canada.
And then Paul Stamets.
And then we'll sit on the board as well. And so we're putting our heads together because we absolutely agree with you that training is really the beating heart of this initiative and this program moving forward. It's what it's really all about, is creating competency around psychedelic services such that we can move forward and really heal people, and also be proud of what this represents here in Oregon, such that excitement can develop around it and it can spread.
Yeah, I think it's definitely primarily about that, but I think that there's something that will naturally unfold as a result. And I think that is what we hope to see, is us unfold a Western rite of passage into exploration of our consciousness. And that will lead to healing of mental health problems and addiction problems. But it will also lead to personal development in a really profound way. And so I think that looking at what the Indigenous work has done over the last several millenniums, and then trying to blend that with modern medicine that was the mentality that we had as we were writing this initiative.
Yeah, I think the key thing to consider, like if we take a real wide angle, is that the psychedelic story is very old. And the 1960s, for example, was really just a blip on the radar of a much larger story. And a lot can be said about that. It's the main points you can take is that psychedelics have traditionally always been handled with great care, right? There's been structure involved. There's been ceremony involved. And so some of that translates into our culture, and it will take its own path, but it will carry with it that seed of wisdom. And I think we're mindful of that, and that's how we'd like to see this roll out.
So there's two major kind of psychedelic trainings happening right now. We're kind of a third minor option at psychedelics today, but CIIS and MAPS have, I don't want to call them extensive, almost sufficient training groups. And, I'm coming from the tradition of Stan Groff, where it takes 2 years to train somebody to do breathwork facilitation. Do you think your group would allow CIIS trained and MAPS trained people to jump right in, or might there be other alignments, or will you have to really see what the group decides on long term?
Yeah, it will unfold as the advisory board really works on this. But I think we can say that, any intensive, well-intentioned training will have a place. But we agree that, there's going to likely be a core training involved, but then we want to build community around training. So it's always ongoing, kind of that intelligentsia around psychedelic services needs to be always alive, not only in providing training, but also in those who participate in this program. So yeah, there'll be some upfront training that will be intensive, and that will be kind of decided what that entails. We're not rebuilding, reinventing the wheel here. There's a lot already there. It's more like organizing how that looks.
And I think we want to focus really specifically on psilocybin, on being trained as a holder of space for people who are having a psilocybin experience. So it's not covering specific or all genre of psychedelics. We are really focused on what we need to know as a community of providers to help people have this experience in a safe and beneficial way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because MDMA is a drug that can at times occasion psychedelic experiences, but it's not a classical psychedelic, right? That mushrooms at a reasonable, moderate to high dose can certainly create these transpersonal experiences that are super hard to categorize and work with for traditionally trained folks.
I agree. And I think ketamine is similar. It does some healing, but it's just similar to MDMA in terms of its psychedelic real.
Well, it's different. I think they all have their own space, and
totally.
There's certainly overlapping skills involved, and you can imagine a psychedelic program that kind of teaches the core skills and then goes into each separate thing. Clearly, here in Oregon, we're starting with psilocybin, and that's where the credentialing will happen to get those skills.
Yeah, so
really
we should be clear
in
on that this is only licensure for psilocybin assisted therapy. So it won't be, that individual who gets that license will not be also providing MDMA services or other.
Yeah, again,
initially
this will all unfold, but I can imagine psychedelic programs more generally that include the psilocybin component that meet the standards for licensure, taking the licensure exam here in Oregon to get the actual license. So there's a separate, like all licenses, there's the training involved, there's the gathering, then there's passing an exam to prove competency, and then the licensure. And again, that's a standalone licensure, not based on prior credentialing. Although there can also be some conversation in that 2-year window regarding how we deal with the more significant mental health challenges, and if there's extra certification necessary to deal with kind of severe addiction or severe depression. And those are all good conversations to have. But it was really important to us to have a baseline where everyone has an opportunity to get involved if they have the heart and the discipline and potentially prior experience as well, not just in a clinical frame, but in an underground frame. We want to bring quality healers to the fore and give them an opportunity to come into the light, as we like to say.
Yeah, I think that Francoise will really, as part of our training advisory board right now, I think she's going to be an amazing contributor to that part of it, helping us to develop a training kind of prototype that looks at the various different individuals and their various different disciplines and what they'll need moving forward in terms of training. I think it's exciting to see. We don't know specifically how the OHA is what their requirements are going to be, but we're preparing so that we can present to them something that they can actually. It's a foundation, maybe they can work off of.
Yeah, I think the OHA will be looking for experts' help because they don't know.
Yeah,
the OHA is the Oregon Health Authority, the authority here in Oregon to put the regs in place.
So I wanted to bring up this one particular clause in your initiative that I was getting some heat about. I've been kind of hyping this a lot on social. media. And I think it was like clause 79 or something, the supremacy clause, where like the state kind of supersedes local districts. Can you kind of unpack, I think you might know what one I'm talking about. Can you kind of unpack what that is about for me? Just, I wanted to make sure people know what it's about.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. The simple answer is that this initiative does not get in the way of any other initiative or any other movement. This is within the four walls of this initiative. There's rules and regulations, but anything that happens outside of it is not under its purview. So things can change and will change in terms of drug policy reform all around this initiative. Anything that you can read in that initiative is only speaking to the program itself. So, for example, at the same time that we are forwarding this initiative to the 2020 ballot, there's another statewide initiative that has a lot of the same supporters and that we are very close with in terms of some of the people that are behind it, that is working to increase access to addiction services as well as decriminalize all drugs across the board, kind of Portugal style, right? Mm-hmm. And so these two things can happen in concert. So, and we'd like to see that actually. There's a space for all of these different angles on drug policy reform. So, yeah, I think I'd have to read the specific thing you're looking at, but I think what the confusion is that somehow this will preempt other attempts at drug policy reform, and that's simply not the case.
Like Sam just put something in the chat where it like duplicates licensure, perhaps. It prevents the duplicates of licensure. So like you get the license at the state level, it means that the local groups can't just say, hey, you also need a license to practice in Eugene or Beaverton or something.
Too. Yeah, that's true as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that seems like a big deal. So yeah, so on the record, there's nothing really in IP 34 that blocks like that the Portugal style thing or local initiatives like Decrim Nature, Portland or anything, right?
Of course not. Of course not. Why would
why would we do that? That would not be smart. I mean, we're all in this together, and the psychedelic Renaissance is kind of like a kaleidoscope, right? There's a bunch of different pieces to it, and when we put them all together, we have a beautiful picture that unfolds. And so if we do it in a smart way, if we collaborate, if we understand that there are different goals, our goal is to create legal access to psilocybin therapy. FDA's goal is to create medical access to psilocybin therapy, and it all can. And Decrim, has their agenda, and we're all a part of the one big picture. And we would never want to get in anybody else's way.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, getting folks like Paul Stamets and Carhart Harris in the loop, like what was that process like for you?
That's been great. Both Paul and Robin have spoken at our events, and that gave us a chance to really get to know them. And I'd say in both those cases, we're friends and communicate regularly, very supportive folks. And more recently, we formalized that relationship with the advisory board. It's just really helpful to have these kind of wider perspectives and the support, obviously.
And they're so different, and yet their understanding of psilocybin and the mushroom itself it's so expansive. I mean, there's so much information that both Robin and Paul bring to the table in terms of what this compound does and what it doesn't do. And so it's been a really great experience to not only get the opportunity to speak with Robin and to speak with Paul and to speak with Mark Hayden, but to develop friendships with them and be able to pick their brains. And, it's been great.
We all want to see this unfold in a safe and healthy way. And it's all very close to our hearts, as it is to many of the listeners out there and to you. We joke, it's not really a joke though, that, there's all kinds of ways that this can go wrong. So we really want everyone involved with good intentions and good ideas and clear thinking and big picture thinking to take the steps methodically and intelligently to roll psychedelics out into the culture and integrate this into the mix in terms of mental health care and wellness more generally. That is a big deal. So, yeah, we want everyone on board who can speak to that. I mean, someone like Robin is already doing it in London with the Center for Psychedelic Studies there. I mean, he broke through the red tape of finding out what was going on in the brain with psychedelics. I mean, for 40 years or something like that, where, well, technology was advancing exponentially with regard to neuroscience and whatnot. We were all on hold with psychedelics, which is probably the most interesting intervention you can make on a human brain. And he was able to open that up. So he's will go down in history for that. And he's leading the charge in London and seeing clients. And, so they've already set up a system around their clinic there. So it's extremely valuable knowledge.
Yeah, that's huge. Do you have any other heavyweights in particular on the, I guess, list of endorsers?
Well, we've got David Bronner. He's awesome. And that's really been a very wonderful experience getting to know David and his entire Bronner team. And I think that between Robin and Mark Hayden and Paul Stamets and David Bronner, we've got a very bright light.
We're able to, we're like one step away from lots of interesting people, but that's really a good core. David is a close friend at this point. We've been in the trenches. David doesn't just fund, and his support and the whole Bronner's family support this initiative. But David specifically is very much involved in our
campaign.
Yeah, we meet every week and are on email all the time, just fleshing everything out as it comes at us. And lately, that's been a lot of figuring out how to push forward, which is kind of a topic we should get into at some point. This is a very unique challenge we face today as a campaign, and I know the whole world is facing unique challenges, and each one of us individually has unique challenges as a result of the coronavirus.
It's pretty nice to get the support of the veteran individuals as well. His last name is Hicks, not Dr. Hicks, but the other individual who was highlighting psychedelics.
We have a great coalition of folks that are representing different angles on the healing power of psilocybin, from veterans to healthcare professionals to clients who have seen healing in different ways. And I think that's more important than ever now. I think mental health care is even going to become more pushed to the front as we, as a culture, go through this transformation, which I hope in the end will be a healing transformation. But it, like all healing, it is a process that entails anxiety and pushing through difficulty.
Yeah. I was thinking about Jesse Gould from Heroic Hearts Project.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
He very much is a supporter and endorser of the campaign. So we're really excited to see the various different communities come together.
That's great. Have you had a chance to meet Jesse yet?
Yeah, we did a Zoom, and he's
great.
Those are the voices that really make the campaign and the movement on a national level, is the testimonials, the people who are speaking from the heart about why we need to make this change in our culture and integrate psychedelics. And that happens at a national level as well as a local level. We're finding those kind of folks here in Oregon and giving them a platform to lead the messaging in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So another really interesting thing in your initiative, the first revolutionary thing being you don't necessarily need a specific indication to get the therapy. Secondly, is the inclusion of natural products, and it's okay to use GMP grade psilocybin as well. I think those two things are phenomenal. Can you maybe unpack that a little bit, or your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's no reason to exclude the mushroom, the organic material itself, and the technology there is really advancing. We see behind the scenes the kind of the creation of processes to derive extracts that are cleanly dosed, and so there's not a lot of difference in my mind in terms of creating quality products, whether they're synthetic or organic. Some people would rather see the organic product, and that's totally understandable. So what we've done in the language of the initiative is just simply say that the powers that be cannot kind of come down from on high and say that we can only use synthetic psilocybin. So facilitators will always have a choice to use organic product.
And I think that's important to to many of the people who are participating. In essence, even when you look at the clinical studies, they create kind of a ceremonial feel to what the individual is entering into. And I think that the mushroom itself is a part of that. And not to say that the extract or the synthetic materials aren't, but yeah, I think that it's just each person has a different way and wants something different. And we didn't want to exclude one. We wanted to make sure that all could be used.
So the way we kind of envision, and again, things will develop and roll out, the way I kind of expect things will happen will be a lot of providers will kind of stack their licenses. In other words, have a license to facilitate or run a service center, as well as have a license to produce their own psilocybin on site. And that may mean just growing mushrooms. That may mean some kind of more elaborate procedure, but it won't be, we try to move away from undue corporate influence. And we did that in a variety of ways in terms of kind of like big companies overtaking the production of psilocybin. I just don't think it's necessary. It's very easy I don't see the product as being that big of business. Frankly, the service side is where we want to open up a marketplace where you can put your shingle out and say, this is what I do, and make an honest living providing services for people.
But you won't see, like we do with cannabis, you won't see stores, selling mushrooms. You won't really see. Yeah. You won't see it commercialized in that sense at all. This is more about the services using psilocybin. And so we took great care to make sure that we limited the service centers to maximum that you can have as an owner are 5, and production centers 1, I believe.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make sure that it stayed in this frame of non-commercialization.
And healing. The focus is on healing, not selling psilocybin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's the spirit of this initiative. And, you ask about some of those questions about, is there a different motive going on here? And I understand that our culture is cynical right now. And you see a lot of theory when there's a lack of understanding, it gets filled in with all kinds of stuff. But I'd just like to impress upon everyone that, we can talk about different details and have opinions, and that's all well and good. But the heart of this is good news. We're trying to move forward a healing modality to help people. And it's just that simple. We're trying to legalize psilocybin assisted therapy. So that's it.
Right. So back to the synthetic part, would you expect that the state would require a really high-end lab to produce these isolates? Or do you think samples could be sent in to certifying group to say, hey, we made these in our lab. Is this adequate? And then we can produce this batch as medicine? Or is this stuff that is going to be worked out later?
It's going to be worked out later. There will be testing procedures. That much is written in that some form of testing will be involved to ensure the products. But yeah, this is all part of the advisory board's work in that 2-year development period.
Cool.
What we did put in the initiative was kind of guardrails around things not going ways that, we don't want to see them go. For example, undue corporate influence and things like that. But so we eliminate certain things, but mostly it's an open dialogue to create something that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because we're not experts on everything, and we're as authors or architects of the initiative, working with the Emerge Law group downtown to really nail all of this stuff. We know that we're not the ones to make decisions on everything. We want experts to be activated to make those detailed decisions about production and even training, things like that. Though we have a pretty good line on training. We want to bring everyone in that really sees this clearly and go from there.
Yeah, I think exactly right, Tom. And I think that is why that 2-year period is so important, because that does give us a really good time to get that advisory board that will be consisting of various experts of various disciplines, get them to sit together with state and federal officials and really think about what this needs to look like, and make sure that we roll out in a way that is going to be successful, because that's what we want. We want it to be successful for the sake of everybody who is going to be involved in it, including those who are going to use these services as a point of healing or a point of consciousness development.
Yeah, I think there's a good point in there, that another aspect of the 2-year development period is to create collaboration and cooperation across the board from a state and federal officials. One thing we can guarantee through that process is that we won't be put in a position where we're standing against federal directives in such a way that facilities are going to get raided or anything like that, right? We'll see the territory beforehand and see the work that needs to be done to create cooperation and roll this out in a healthy way. And that was one of those things that was brought to our attention a little bit later on in the process, that we really need to address that. We can't just step out and make this a risky thing on that level. So
which led to our revision.
Yeah, and so we tweaked the language for that reason, and brought us to where we are today, where we can feel as confident as possible to move this onto the ballot.
That's great. Before we get into timelines, I want to ask a few other things, or just quick comments. So, like one interesting development, there's a company in the U.S. that somehow made a patent for testing levels of psilocybin in raw material. And so they're selling tested materials with known quantities of psilocybin and psilocin in them. So you can kind of like predict, if you're eating this mushroom, this many grams of this batch, or because it's ground and put into pellets, not pellets, but probably gel caps. And you know that it's like, okay, this is like 300 milligrams of dried mushroom or whatever your choice is. So I thought that was interesting, and hopefully that's something that's looked at. And secondarily, in terms of safety, food, we'll bring it into like the food safety realm. I've grown a number of batches in the past. I had to stop when I started this podcast. Probably before that I stopped, but some batches looked really ugly. There was aspergillus everywhere, which is a really bad mold that can upset stomachs and cause lung infections. So I would hope that like food type testing was done, because I know that there's mushrooms out there that are just really ugly in the marketplace now.
I think that will absolutely take place.
Well,
go ahead.
It's in there. Yeah, there's regulations around. Again, they're not detailed. They're just telling the advisory board that they must address these issues, and then you spell those out a little bit. And so, yeah, that will be a topic of rulemaking.
Great. And
so when you write an initiative, my understanding, you write the core initiative, that passes, and then there's a rulemaking process that happens within the parameters of the rails that have been set up by the initiative itself. And in the core initiative, there's directives, right? These issues must be looked at. You give a little bit of form to it, but enough flexibility for what needs to happen, right?
Yeah, this should be a part of it. This should not be removed from it. And, all of those things have to be addressed. It takes a long time.
That's why our initiative was so long, because if you don't put some shape to that, you don't have the framework you need to create a successful program. So the initiative being long isn't an attempt to like create a bunch of undue regulations. It's a attempt to identify all the areas where dialogue needs to happen and development needs to happen. And there's a lot of very detailed thing to bring a framework down that stands on its own, that it's a full framework to integrate this modality into the culture.
One of the, so I kind of love drama a little bit. I think a lot of humans love drama, but what I'm thinking about is this like dialogue between the feds and the state level people. I remember a few years ago, California, I think the California State Police had a standing order from the governor to block any federal raids and arrest federal agents that were raiding any kind of cannabis shops. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a really fascinating move, kind of a states' rights situation. And I would wonder, this isn't pot, this is very different from a pot thing. So I would be really interesting to see how this plays out between the feds and the state.
Yeah, it will be. And, I'm really hoping that by 2023, when this actually is implemented, that the FDA trials will have succeeded and the approval will have been issued. And that, I think, will change the dialogue.
Yeah, and that's the main difference between cannabis is there's a lot of, it's unfortunate that cannabis research was so
minimal,
blocked, basically. Yeah. And that hasn't been so much the case, although it's very difficult to do research in psychedelics, but they've managed to do it anyways to a heroic degree. And so it's really hard to have that same attitude from a federal perspective when the FDA has declared it a breakthrough therapy. It's more efficacious than other therapies potentially. And again, so we're the initiative the advisory board that the initiative creates has many different components to it. We've been talking about the more kind of practice-oriented components, but it also has political components. It brings in the state attorney and gives directives to have communication where possible with different entities. And so we really thought a lot about that because we don't want drama. we're drama free.
Well, that's our hope.
Yeah. And
again, that's why we've moved cautiously. That's why we gave ourselves 5 years to get to 2020 and get this on the ballot. That's why we added the 2-year implementation period into the initiative, because this has got to be well thought out, or it could be dramatic and it could become a mess. And if we take all the necessary, what we can foresee right now as the necessary precautions, I think we have the greatest chance of seeing something very successful come to be.
Totally. Yeah. So regarding timeline, so the vote is in July, is that right?
November.
Good. All right. So you got some more time, but
signatures are needed by July.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the presidential election, the big inflection point of everything happens. And this being part of that.
Does the universe change in November? We shall find out.
Yeah. So our predicament right now is we have to collect signatures by July 2nd. We've done a great job up to the point of the having to shut down for the corona. We had gotten up to the vicinity of 130,000 signatures, which is remarkable. We need about 16,000 more, which sounds like a very small percentage compared to what we've already gained. But when you are in a position where you can no longer canvass, you cannot go out on the street and do the job, that becomes quite a challenge. And so we are brainstorming lots of ways and putting in ways to gather those signatures, but they're tough. And essentially what we've been doing is creating you're left with the internet and you're left with the mail. So we've been creating social media ads to direct people to yesonip34.org, where you can download the petition. And this is specifically for Oregon voters. Download the petition, sign it, and mail it to us, which is a little bit of work, but absolutely necessary. And the only way we're actually going to bring this to fruition after all this hard work to get this far, we really need everyone's help in Oregon to pull together and make this last push to get on the ballot. And it's a real challenge. It's also really pulling us all together in Oregon to make this last effort. We were sailing along and looking to finish this up in kind of non-dramatic fashion, but then the world stopped, as Sam likes to say.
Well, the nice thing is that we have the minimum 112,000 signatures required. The problem is that you have to have that 25% cushion to ensure that all the signatures actually do meet that 112,000 necessary in order to get on the ballot. And so it's bittersweet to have not be able to get out there and spend another 3 weeks and get all those signatures, the remaining signatures. But at the same time, it is highlighting that we can do this as a community in a different way. And we can be encouraged by what we see weekly in terms of how people are participating, how they're continuing to financially contribute to the campaign, because this has changed what we had planned. Nobody anticipated COVID. And so, of course, that increased our budget. And so we're finding that to be something that people are sympathetic to. And that is something that anybody from any country could participate in. And that would be helping us to get that extra $300,000 we need to fund this different type of digital campaign to get those final signatures.
And the mail, it's just extremely cost intensive. We're actually mailing petitions out to people who don't have printers. And that means we have to mail the sheet, but also the entire initiative. That's the rules of the game. And our initiative is long. So we have this package. We have to send out thousands of them. So it's really expensive and challenging, but it's what we have to do. And we've come this far, and we're not going to stop, obviously, and we're going to make it happen. So, a few things just to kind of ask the Oregonians out there is, not only sign the petition and send it in, but spread the word, spread the link to 5 friends. If everyone did that, that would be super helpful. And once you've signed, if you can chip in and help us financially make this happen, that's huge, and that goes for everyone out there. And again, that's yes on ip34.org.
And we're so blessed, Joe. We're so blessed that we have so many people already that support this campaign globally. And I'm just really amazed every day at how much we get in terms of support and how excited people are to see this possibility. And this is a historic election, and this is a historic effort to create legal access to psilocybin. And isn't it wonderful for all of us to be able to participate in history?
Yeah, 100%. It's very fascinating. Is there any... So it's a state level initiative. We all know that. Is there any kind of like strangeness because you're getting so much national and international support? Like, is the state looking at it as going like, oh, this is wild. Why is there so much outsider attention here?
Yeah, not so much, because we have such strong support here in Oregon. There's a real grassroots feeling on the ground. Our volunteer force is tremendous.
Oh, yeah.
And they're really the face of the campaign. They are the campaign. That's what we always say. The campaign is you. And here in Oregon, there's a lot of activation because it's so close to people's hearts. People who have had the experience and have generally been moved by it and have this kind of real personal reason to move this therapy forward that, is missing in a lot of other kind of issues out there. This particular issue really energizes people on a personal level. That said, people who've never done psilocybin before are getting on board because it's getting associated with positive change, whether it's the eco-mindedness or the idea that there's a different way for mental health care that is more humanistic. These are all messages that are true and resonate with people. So that's the kind of genesis of the energy here in Oregon. So in Oregon, most people are focused on the activity in Oregon. Sheri and I obviously are tapping into the support on a wider scale, and sometimes the media picks up on it, and that's great. But yeah, the energy is really centralized here, and that's our focus.
I would like to add, though, that I think that our volunteer base and all of those who are watching this in Oregon are encouraged by and motivated by and inspired by the global efforts being done right now that contribute to the possibility of this initiative passing. And so it's not like we're this lone little Oregon, an island of people trying to do something that the rest of the world doesn't understand. And I think it's very, very exciting for all of us Oregonians to know that it is a global issue.
And again, we can thank the scientific community. They're the heroes that allows this conversation to happen.
Yeah.
The
NYU, Johns Hopkins, Imperial College of London, UCLA, University of British Columbia. There's so much.
Especially now, there's more than we can tick off.
Yeah.
That used to be that we could say those few major universities and pretty much capture it, but now the spread is a beautiful thing. That's always been part of the equation. It's always been part of the awareness here in Oregon. The science is continuing to develop, and that's
continues to show greater and greater promise.
Yeah,
absolutely. Have you seen anybody try to take your language to their own states? Your bill to your initiative?
Not yet, but I think that what we're hoping for is that this will provide a template that the rest of the states that have initiative capabilities could actually use and tweak it to the specific laws of their state. And the hope is that we have been able to do a lot of the hard and costly work and create something that will be usable by other states.
Yeah, that's really cool. I imagine your language would be pretty easily transferred over to other states.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the goal is, to create psilocybin therapy. And so when it's singular focused on that specific goal, then it's, the states have something that the individuals who might come together and put this template into place in other states, they have also the ability to just be centrally focused on what their goal is, which is psilocybin assisted therapy. That's it. We want to heal people. We want to see people heal themselves. I think that's a better thing to say.
Great. And I guess one last thing before we kind of wrap, and this isn't necessarily about your project, but the other initiative is IP44, the Drug Policy Alliance, kind of Portugal style bill. Do you have any idea on where that stands right now in terms of like getting in on the ballot?
I think they're in a similar boat. They're right at the end of their signatures, but needing to get those last signatures in creative ways like we are.
Good. And is that sponsored by the Drug Policy Alliance? Do you know offhand?
Well, no, it's sponsored by local folks like Anthony Johnson, who's a friend of ours who did the cannabis stuff, and Measure 91. Yeah, the Drug Policy Alliance is supporting that bill for sure.
Great. Cool.
Yeah, it is very cool, Joe. I mean, imagine this. Imagine that in a few short months, we see IP44 pass, which creates care for people that have problems with drugs, and then reduces penalties, decriminalizes Portugal style. And then also we see IP34 pass that creates this ability to have psilocybin assisted psychotherapy. I just think that what a package! Like it'll be Christmas.
It's worth kind of clarifying that. So it's both and, not either or, with regard to legalizing psilocybin therapy and decriminalizing.
That's correct.
You see what I mean? So decriminalizing by itself does not create a framework for therapy to exist. You need a legal framework for that.
It at least lowers the harm profile, is the way I look at it, of drugs and the drug war.
Exactly. And so the two strands of the movement are complementary and compatible. And it's important that we as a community get that kind of to sink in, because think about what can happen in Oregon. A full move to a public health approach to substances and drug use. In other words, a model that decriminalizes addiction, and creates services for addiction rather than putting people in jail. brings the baseline of decriminalization across the board and creates frameworks for healing plant medicines. That to me is the vision for the future. And everyone has a place in that. So let's start talking about one psychedelic movement instead of different movements. That's what we preach, is that there's a unified picture out there on the horizon that cuts the legs out of the drug war, but we've got to see the bigger picture here and get behind it.
Yeah, I see it as an ecosystem, and it's evolving towards what we really want. It's going to take some time, but we're going to get there. I always say, like, realistically, what I want is 40 years away, but I'm working on it as if it's 3 years out. And I think that we need to dream big like that. And you two are really dreaming big. And I really appreciate that. It's, why didn't somebody else think of this? I'm sure you two think of that all the time. You're like, why are we the first?
We don't know. It's the mushroom gods.
Yeah, I told you to. So anything else before we close here?
No, just to reiterate, we need everyone's help to push to the finish line here. We're excited to see that happen. And I think it'll be even sweeter to get on the ballot with everybody's help out there. So thank you for having us, and thank you for this good conversation and dialogue.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Yeah, you're welcome. Visit on ip34.org. Is that it? To find out more. Yeah. Well, Thomas and Sheri, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there you have it, the folks from IP34, or the Psilocybin Initiative 2020. It's a really interesting project. I hope you found it at the very least interesting. And, why not consider doing this in your home state or your home country? This is an interesting time where we've got a little bit of downtime, maybe, if we're not working or whatever we're up to these days. Our normal day-to-day is not what it used to be, and now we've got some extra time. Maybe it's time to mimic this ballot initiative in your state, or perhaps it's time to start a religion in your state to have this stuff protected from, federal intervention. And, if you're overseas outside the U.S., look into what is possible. Like, there's always this pipe dream of what's really possible downstream, but what's possible next? Kevin Kelly, guy who founded Wired Magazine, has this idea of the adjacent possible. And we don't necessarily need to look at, creating, free energy space stations or whatever. We can look at what's next, and figuring out legal access in your country through political efforts is possible. Agencies can see these things as medicine, and that's proven in many places. So, why not do that? And, please dig in more if you're interested. Dig into their document, the PSI 2020 IP34 documents. The one clause that you might check out is called the Supremacy Clause, and this is the one that's somewhat controversial. I find really nothing with it controversial. Read it a few times, and it just seems like there's no room for double taxation, or like a town can't make their own certifying body. The state is the certifying body and regulatory body. So you can't double dip as a town or county or something. So that's really what that clause means. I think it's 79, if you want to dig into that one. I guess that's it for right now. Thank you for listening to this one. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to support the show, we've got a deal rigged up with Audible, probably the most used app on my phone. Amazing audiobook app, and you can get almost any book up there for free if you use our code or our URL here, audibletrial.com/psychedelics-today or psychedelicstoday.com/welcome, and you just follow the link. And you can get all sorts of great books. The Mescaline book by Mike J. is extraordinary. Eric Davis's High Weirdness, if you're into the intellectual side of the weird, is very worth it. There's Sacred Knowledge up there, Psychedelic Medicine, a bunch of books by Tim Leary, Ram Dass, and many more books that you're going to want to get your hands on. Even Stan Grof's Holotropic Breathwork is up there. So that's an extraordinary book, and will give you a look into the method of Dr. Stan Grof and his holotropic breathwork. Really a applicable to psychedelic work. It's just, legal, available now, and, it doesn't require anything controversial to go into your body. So I love it. I've been doing that stuff since 2003, and I would never have it any other way. So what else do we have going on? Yeah, Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists is for sale over at psychedeliceducationcenter.com, along with some other free courses and some slightly more affordable courses. So just check out the website and see if there's anything for you, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And I think that's it. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and that you tune in again next time. This is Joe Moore signing off for Psychedelic Safe from Breckenridge, Colorado. Bye-bye.